lot of these guys. Now, these are the stats, though, and this is what ties it together. This is what's crazy. This is the Lions' man coverage, and I broke it down into coverage types. This is how good they've been at man this season, and I think this is really important. Single high, right? Single high meaning a single high safety. Most of the times they're getting an extra body to stop the run. And Lions in single high coverage this year, which is typically the spot where you want to throw the ball against teams because you get isolated one-on-ones on the outside. It's more clear cut there. Not always, right? You could have a single high and they could roll out of it and give help, right? You could go cloud coverage. So there's ways to not give that. But typically, especially the way the Lions play it, we know Lions single high is usually just cover 3 or cover 1. They're pretty straightforward. They don't do a lot of the cloud stuff. Single high typically is like guaranteeing one-on-ones on the outside. And for the Lions this season in coverage where you typically would throw against that, 4th completion percentage allowed, 8 touchdowns and 10 picks, 5th best in EPA, and they have the 5th most pass attempts, which means they're doing it a ton. And then, this stat's nuts too. Without pressure, so we're thinking like, yo, they got to be getting pressure all the time. When the Lions haven't gotten pressure, look at their stats. The completion percentage goes up. So typically you're going to get completions when teams don't get pressure, 68%. But 15 touchdowns to 13 picks, 4th best in EPA, and again, the 6th most attempts. So this happens a lot. Those two stats are crazy. And then if you go sub, okay, what type of coverage? I mean, cover 0, 9th in completion percentage allowed, 2nd best EPA. Cover 1, 3rd completion percentage, 7th best EPA. 2-man, 4th in completion percentage, best EPA in football. And I think we saw that against Minnesota. They are awesome in 2-man. They're built to play it. I think they're so comfy there because we all know that they have press corners. Like, that's where they're built. Every corner they have is like a press corner. So I think it makes them super comfortable to just go get physical, throw off timing. Amik just wants to battle dudes. And that's why Amik was great, because Amik didn't care. Like, Amik would get cooked over top, and he don't care, man. That dude just wants to battle. He's just going to throw himself at Justin over and over. So he was perfect for that, because then if you slid help over top, he could just be that aggressive bulldog at the line of scrimmage. And I think that's why 2-man works so well. It's been such a good spot. It's just there's a lot of teams you can't get there because teams will run the football. And what I think is so important about tying this all together is this last stat line, because now you tie in coverage to run defense. And if you look at what the Lions do, when they have a stacked box, they're a really strong run defense. 3.6 a carry, 14th in EPA. I don't know why I put expected there. It's supposed to be EPA. But when the box is not stacked, look at that. They allow 5.6 yards per carry, 26th in EPA, almost 1,000 yards rushing. That's really important because that typically ties right together with single high coverage. So the Lions' ability to play single high coverage to be so good there and have this well-rounded unit that can play man allows them to give more stacked looks than not stacked looks, which, as we see by the numbers, would be a really big problem if they had to lead into that. So it's in a lot of ways, like, the coverage is kind of the reliable unit for us right now. Like, the coverage is kind of the thing that we can hang our hats on, which is crazy, but that's why the title is like it is. That's what they can hang their hats on as a defense is, yo, in coverage, we're sound. And we're well-rounded, so it can actually help our run defense. It actually makes our pressure better because we don't maybe get a ton of pressure all the time. We're not one of the top teams there. We blitz a lot, but it makes everything else better because we don't get exposed in the back end by doing something like that. We play single high safety. We don't get exposed. We're one of the best in football. So we aren't exposed when we don't get pressure. It's crazy. But this has like been a culmination of what they built, and we're not even talking about the starter. Like, Carlton is not out there. Carlton is a normal starter, right? Like, it's not even a fully starting unit that we thought coming into the year. It's not even that. It's Trevor Nowaski out there at times. But it's such a deep group right now. And it's almost like, it makes me think like if you're building a team like on Madden or something, and you know how they have that like weird thing where it's like, well, what type of corner is he? Is he man or zone? You know, that kind of stuff. And you're like, well, if you get all of them together, you get like a boost. That's what it feels like the Lions have. It's like they put everybody together that fits the same style, and they all get a boost because they all do the same thing really well. So when they ask them to play a certain coverage, everybody kind of excels in that room, and it makes it tough for an offense. And I think that's what happened to the Vikings here is they ran up against a team that could do this. I'll tell you what, the Rams, these aren't their stat lines. This is not what it looks like. This is unique to the line. Most teams don't have this across the board. This is unique. And I got more graphics to go, but I want to see what the chat's talking about. Is Glenn getting coaching offers? Glenn has, well, I don't know if he's getting offers, but he's definitely getting interviews. I think if he leaves, the most likely team, it sounds like, is Saints. But I'm not as caught up on that. Like, I have the team names, but I'm not as caught up as some of other people. So if y'all are caught up on that, man, throw it out there. Where do y'all think guys are going? I mean, y'all can get that conversation going. I think if Glenn leaves, he goes to the Saints, unless the Jets bring in his GM. Maybe that's Spielman. I mean, maybe that's Newmark, something like that. Getting Anzalone back, huge. Anzalone's such a dog, man. And that's what it is, man, because it's exactly that point. Like, when Jack was without Alex, Jack would get some of those straight man assignments, and he wasn't great there, even though he grades out at his 11th according to PFF in terms of like his advanced coverage grade that they're now putting out there. He's 11th. There's a role that fits him better. And that's exactly it. It's like when you have Alex, his role is much more clarified. It's more zone. It's more roaming the middle. When you have him in man all the time, Buffalo, that's not where he's best. And the thing is with Alex is that Pro Football Focus even said that over their years of grading, Alex has constantly been one of the best linebackers in football in terms of separation allowed. Like, he doesn't give up much separation ever. So he's been, I mean, he goes back to the beginning. He was like one of the first building blocks. It's cool because it's been a constant process. Like, think about this. Think about if the Lions would have fired Aaron Glenn like a year and a half or 2 years into this. Like, how things would have potentially changed with personnel, and you would have had to reset things. Like, this usually happens as a whole. You know, new GM, new head coach, everything kind of restarts. And you're like, all right, which guys do we keep? That kind of deal. And we had to do that when these guys first got here. But if like you would have fired the defensive coordinator, and because nobody calls defense like Glenn. He plays man coverage 60.7% of the time. Now, the Denver Broncos actually tied with that at 60.7%, interestingly enough, but essentially nobody else plays that style. 60% of the time he plays man. Most teams play 70% zone. So it's great. He's super unique. But if you would have like fired that guy 2 years in, and then you would have had the overlap of like, okay, we have this guy, and then what if you would have had Branch added too, and then you're like adding pieces, but then new guy comes in and he's like, I actually play a lot more zone. I play like more straight cover 3. And then he'd be like, well, how does a Meek fit it? So now you would have had some weird overlap. Then you would have had to make this transition. The Lions have never had a transition. It's been a constant build where it's like, all right, Alex, okay, we got him. Then we throw Jack, and now it's like, all right, these two guys fit perfectly together. You know, like the guys offset each other perfectly. And then at cornerback, it's like that. Now cornerback's been a complete overhaul, but safety, Brian Branch, he fits really well with Ivy Melavanu. Like once those two teamed up, it's like these two are great together. Like they've been able to constantly kind of build that year after year after year, which I think is awesome. I think it's really awesome. And I don't think a lot of teams have that. Like a lot of teams, you know, there's a lot of moving pieces, and that's where we've always wanted to be as Lions fans. That team that's like, yo, we have consistency. we have the same kind of group of guys. We have the core, and it's not changing, and we can continue to build towards the same direction. And I think it's all kind of like a accumulation of that at this point. Plus, Glenn has just gotten better. I'm sorry to him, but if we've gotten Brian Flores in 22, I would have been for it. Yes, Goff cooks him, but he's more creative than NG. So you're saying if we would have got Brian Flores in 2022, it would have been better than Aaron Glenn? I think that the thing is they're very two unique styles, right? I show you the single high rates, definitely very different. Brian Flores and the Vikings have one of the largest two high rates, and Brian Flores is great. And you're saying Goff cooks him, but he's more creative. He's definitely I would say. I think I'd agree. Like more, if we're saying more creative in terms of more diverse, I'd give you that. I'd give it. Now I do think though, I think there's more movement typically. I think there's typically more movement, and I don't know where Brian Flores was probably ahead of Glenn when he first started, no doubt. Glenn has, to me, gotten a lot better, and he's definitely clearly gotten his pieces now, and he's gotten better year after year. Again, the stats backed it up. Year after year after year, you can buy into, like, oh, this guy's gotten consistently better. But I would say, yeah, I agree. Brian Flores is probably more creative. There's more movement, typically post-snap. But he has a very similar plan in a lot of his games as well. Like he still has the foundation of who he is, right? There's creativity at the line in terms of who's blitzing, who's not. But I think at early this season that got a little bit overblown to the point where it was like, we've never seen that before. And it was like, okay, well, timeout. Teams have always done this, and teams still do this. Green Bay does this. Go watch Green Bay on third down. Their defense is the same thing, right? You don't know who's coming. Everybody stacks the line. So teams have always done that. I think that they are creative in the sense that they still play a lot of cover 3, but they do it out of too high looks. That's where I think things get weird for them, is they have so much safety movement on most plays. I think that's where things are creative, and because of all the safety movement, their cornerbacks will play safety, and their safeties will roll down. That's where I think they're more creative, is that there's not a lot of teams that do that. So yeah, I'd agree. I think the Lions are more straightforward typically. Like, they have more kind of defined roles. With Minnesota, it's less, I think, defined. It's more about like, yo, Harrison could go play outside corner on this snap, and then Stephon Gilmore's playing safety, and then Van Ginkel's dropping, but here comes Grenard. Like, there's more of that. I think Glenn's a little bit more straightforward, but Glenn has been unique. Like, he didn't play the Packers the same way that he played the Vikings. He's been unique, and he's definitely gotten better. It's more beat me every play versus high risk, high reward. This is what scares me about this year. It's more beat me every play, high risk, high reward. I don't agree with that, if I'm being honest. If you're talking about like this, I don't think that's how the Lions. I think that's been the push. I don't think that's completely true, but I think there's a number that gives credit to what you're saying, which is we give up a pretty high explosive play rate. It's like just over 10%. It's not the worst, but it's pretty high. So there is that. And I think just in general, if you're going to play single high safety, yes, you have a chance to get exposed over top. And that's why that's so important, because teams typically, if they're playing that, are going to get cooked in coverage. But the fact that the Lions in single high are so good in coverage is what makes them pretty unique, because they can do that, which is typically going to help them against the run, which as we see, it definitely does. But most teams, that's not what you want to do, because you're going to get cooked in coverage.